I went back and I looked through the numbers to look at Stacey Abrams' claims about Georgia being in play in 2020, and I don't think that the numbers bear it out. And I've written about this at theresurgent.com, and it's worth pointing out to you as well. She says that it's going to be a significant swing state. Georgia is definitely going to be a battleground in 2020. I don't think it's as swingy, though, as they claim. So here's the thing. In 2018, Democrats came within 55,000 votes of taking the governor's mansion. And if you look at what they did in 2014 with Jason Carter, there was a 200,000 vote gap. So Abrams was able to bring it down, close the gap by 150,000 votes. In 2014, though, the state saw a 50% participation rate. Let's be honest, in 2014, there were a lot of Republicans who were not enthused by Nathan Deal. Nathan Deal had vetoed the religious liberty legislation he had said he would support. Nathan Deal he'd done a lot of things that aggravated a lot of conservatives. In fact, you can tell that Nathan Deal wasn't popular with Republicans because there was a massive surge for the Libertarian candidate. And the Libertarian candidate in Georgia, for those of you who don't live in Georgia, the Libertarian candidate is typically a protest candidate that the Republicans use to register their disapproval. Normally, the Libertarian candidate in Georgia gets about 35,000 votes, plus or minus about 10,000 votes. That year in 2014, he got into six digits, got significant votes in 2014. Got a real protest vote going in 2016 against Nathan Deal. I take that back. I got up into, I think, 60,000 votes. I said that wrong. So now let's put this in perspective. In 2018, there was a 61% participation rate in Georgia. 2014, there was a 50% participation rate. If you look at the presidential years, though, it's pretty consistent. There was a 72% voter participation rate in 2012. There was a 76% participation rate in 2016. Most notably, I think, Democrats increased from 2016 to 2018. It was the Republicans that declined. See, what I've been telling people all along when you look at the numbers is that Democrats treated 2018 as if it was a presidential race. Typically, regardless of the state, the numbers of voters who participate in an off-year election goes down from a presidential election. The presidential election always has higher turnout. Now, Georgia has its gubernatorial races in off-year elections. It has the presidential election in obviously, the presidential years. And typically, there's a Senate race attached to it. This year, there was going to be David Perdue's race, this coming 2020 David Perdue's race, and Johnny Isakson was going to be in 2022. In 2018, there was no Senate seat on the ballot. It was just Brian Kemp and the statewide office holders, the lieutenant governor, the governor, secretary of state, etc. But here's the relevant detail that I think everybody's missing and nobody wants to talk about. Stacey Abrams was able to generate 45,722 more votes than Hillary Clinton in 2016. To some degree, that tells you how bad Hillary Clinton was in 2016. But there's some data missing that puts this in perspective. What was Stacey Abrams known for? From 2016 to 2018, what was Stacey Abrams known for? This is deeply relevant to whether or not Georgia is going to be a swing state. What was she known for? Stacey Abrams was known for her ability to conduct effective voter registration drives. That's what her nonprofit did. Stacey Abrams' entire existence was about, remember in 2016, she started a huge voter registration effort to find new voters and get them to the polls to beat Nathan Deal, and it didn't work for her. So she spent 2016 to 2018 doubling down on voter registration. And the results speak for themselves. You have to hand it to her. 985,535 people registered to vote for 2018. Now, let me just give this some perspective for you so you understand. In 2012, there were 5 million registered voters in Georgia. In 2016, there were 5,400,000 voters, roughly 400,000 voters in a 4-year period registered to vote. In a 2-year period, Stacey Abrams was able to surge voter registration to close to 1 million people. Close to 1 million people. That's really impressive. And that would, in and of itself, justify her memo to Democrats that's circulating around Washington, D.C. right now, saying Georgia's going to be a huge swing state in 2020. There's just one problem. The precise number of new voters registered between 2016 and 2018 was 985,535, which makes the number 45,722 deeply, deeply, deeply relevant. Because 45,722 were the number of voters that showed up to vote. You had 1 million people newly registered, and only 45,000 of them showed up. Now, let me adjust that somewhat. Stacey Abrams was able to grow Hillary Clinton's margin in the state by 45,722 voters. So we can presume that some people stayed home. We can presume that some people shifted, and we can presume that some of those were new voters. We don't know how many were new voters per se. I haven't looked. There's a way to figure it out. I just haven't looked at it. But it would only be about 10% at the most. In other words, Stacey Abrams was able to get 1 million people to vote, and it really maybe impacted not a lot of them, at most 100,000, and yet Brian Kemp won by 55,000, which means that a good portion of those people were probably Republicans, which didn't really help Stacey Abrams. So now let's extrapolate that to 2020. Brian Kemp won with a 55,000 vote margin against Stacey Abrams in an off year. In 2016, you saw 1% of voters refuse to vote for president with Donald Trump on the ballot and Hillary Clinton on the ballot. And Donald Trump still had a 100+ thousand person list. So you got Brian Kemp has a 55,000 vote cushion. Donald Trump has a 100,000 vote cushion. You get into 2020, you add back in that 1%. You know, there's a significant cushion for the GOP in Georgia of in excess of 100,000 people. Even assuming that the Democrats are able to pour money in for the next 2 years and get voters out to vote and also get new people registered, the past is the best indicator of the future in politics. People who typically don't vote are not going to vote in the future. There's still a 100,000 vote cushion for the GOP, but wait, there's more. In 2008, Republicans had 2,048,000 voters. In 2012, 2,078,000 voters. In 2016, 2,089,000 voters. And in 2018, only 1,978,000. There was a real fall off between the 2016 and the 2018. As I said, and this is important, as I said, Republicans treated it as an off-year election. This bears witness to the theory. The Republicans did not turn out at a presidential level. They turned out at an off-year election, which it was. Democrats, however, they actually did well. Look at the Democratic numbers. In 2008, presidential, 1.8 million. In 2012, Democrats got 1.7 million. In 2016, 1.8 million again. In 2018, 1.9 million. They went up. They went up by about 50,000 actually. So you still have the Republican 100,000 person cushion in a presidential election year. But wait, there's even more. In 2016, 125,000 people voted for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate. 125,000 people voted for Gary Johnson. The Libertarian I mentioned typically gets 35,000 votes. In 2016, in addition to 125,000 people voting Libertarian, 73,000 people did not even vote in the presidential race. So it's easy to conclude that 75,000 of the Libertarian protests would probably have gone to Republican. In fact, there's data to support this. In 2016, more people voted for Johnny Isakson than voted for Donald Trump. By 46,702 votes, Johnny Isakson brought in more Republicans. In fact, we can see that the Libertarian vote went down in the race with Johnny Isakson. There was a Libertarian candidate there as well. And Johnny Isakson didn't benefit. We also can see this protest and Libertarian vote in 2014. Go back to 2014. David Perdue against Michelle Nunn. David Perdue got 20,000 more votes from Libertarians than Nathan Deal got. There was a big shift between David Perdue, and then there was a jump in the Libertarian vote protesting Nathan Deal. In other words, the GOP margin in Georgia is actually bigger than 100,000. It's closer to 200,000 in a presidential election year. Donald Trump caused a protest vote. Donald Trump got a Libertarian candidate, and that will happen again. But again, this is really, really important to see that the protest vote protested Donald Trump, and then those libertarians and the people who refused to vote for Donald Trump, they jumped into the Republican race for the Senate. So Donald Trump, David Perdue, and somebody we don't know of are all going to be on the ballot in 2020 running for federal office. 2 senators and 1 president. The data suggests Republicans are going to turn out at presidential levels. They always do in presidential years. And that level is going to be higher than the Democratic level. Much of the talk about Abrams' voter registration effort centers around her 1 million people that she got to register to vote, but that only improved Democratic margins in Georgia by 45,000 total votes. Actually, to be precise, 45,722. What I find actually very interesting about that, again, is 75,722. Johnny Isaacson was able to pick up that number plus some from libertarians in Georgia. He got 46,702 people in 2016 that voted libertarian for Gary Johnson. That's actually pretty freaking significant. Remember as well that 1% of Georgia's voter population refused to vote in the presidential race. Actually, it's like 1.6% of Georgia residents who voted in 2016 refused to cast their ballot in the presidential race. Now, let me explain to you what Abrams is actually trying to do. In 2016, Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz in Texas, and the media and white progressives poured their hearts and souls and money into Texas. You had white liberals in Brooklyn putting Beto O'Rourke signs on their front stoops. And they ignored Andrew Gillum and Stacey Abrams, 2 candidates who, had they had some of the resources Beto O'Rourke consumed, probably could have won because of the Democratic wave. Stacey at least could have gotten into a runoff had she had more resources. She probably wouldn't have won the runoff, actually. Andrew Gillum might have in Florida. He actually had a better shot than Stacey Abrams. But they were black candidates who were ignored by white progressives who decided to fall in love with Beto O'Rourke against Ted Cruz, who got closer to Cruz than he probably should have, but he still lost. So now there's a lot of white guilt out there among Democrats. They ignored the progressive black candidates in favor of the progressive white candidate because they were white and he was white. At least that's what they're telling themselves. And so Stacey Abrams is tapping into their white guilt. And she's smart to do it. It's a way to get money. Stacey Abrams is a consummate grifter when it comes to these sorts of things. She's tapped into white guilt, and she's convinced them they need to pour their money into Georgia in 2020, not because she really thinks Georgia's in play. Stacey Abrams is a smart woman. She can read this data just as I've read this data. There is going to be a bigger Republican bounce in 2020. There will be some pent-up demand to stop the Democrats in 2020 that didn't exist with Hillary Clinton in 2016 because she wasn't a radical wackadoo socialist, even if she was a Clinton. You're going to have 2 Republican Senate candidates. The GOP will come home. The Libertarians will vote for them. That will stop the Democratic wall and the Democratic wave in 2020, even if there is one. Stacey Abrams knows this. She can look at the data. She can see it too. What Abrams also knows is this. She needs to begin to lay the groundwork for 2022. So what she's really doing is she's urging the Democrats to pour resources into Georgia, not to actually win in 2020, but to seed the ground for her in 2022. And she knows the Democrats feel so guilty for backing Beto over her and Andrew Gillum, they're liable to pour money into the state now. Even if it costs them the White House in 2020, even if it costs them other Senate seats, they're willing to do it to make it up for her.
As both sides target Georgia for 2020, Eric gives you the news you need.